we're doing, Unit 2 mind map overview, so it'll be for your viewing pleasure. Unit 2 is the Reformation era. That's where we're at, coming off of the Renaissance, which we'll talk about. And where we're heading, next unit, absolutism and constitutionalism, sort of the power that fills the vacuum left by the loss of the Catholic Church influence and the decline of the Holy Roman Empire as well. So we're still looking at the years 1450 all the way to 1648, so we're still in that big period one. Dates across the top, I would say, are significant and need to be committed to memory, so we will refer to those as well. Our different colors represent different themes almost of what takes place, from Luther and the Protestant Reformation to simple other reform movements as they continue, to the wars of religion, the Catholic Reformation. Seems to be all with the exception of the general trend of society and politics in the light blue down there. All right, so where do we want to begin? Things we put in green sort of predate the Reformation, but kind of set the tone. One, briefly, the Great Schism, so the Catholic Church splitting before 1450, having 2 and at one point 3 popes. The plague and the church's inability to solve that crisis, helpless popes, will contribute. Hussites and Lollards, 2 reform movements well before 1450, but are suppressed pretty quickly. Why do we start to see then a greater reform movement after 1450? The printing press. You're able then to record the ideas, namely of Luther, and it takes off from there. These movements were isolated because you didn't have that transmission of knowledge taking place. Printing press, big deal. Okay, so Christian humanism, offshoot of the Renaissance, we've already discussed it, but that is as Erasmus talks about, I think he said it, but anyway, Erasmus is the egg that Luther hatched, something like that. Anyway, Luther gets his influence from the writings of Erasmus and others, so we should be familiar with Praise of Folly in the context of being critical of the Catholic Church, but not calling for a whole new church movement. So what Luther does is extremely significant in that creating a brand new church will delegitimize Catholicism and just tear reality apart. You think now, I don't want to give the year because I might use this from 5 years, I don't know, that like Americans are in 2 different political thought bubbles and social bubbles. That's what's sort of created here too with Luther, is 2 different realities, and so that's eventually going to get to these wars of religion. We'll talk about that. So let's talk about Luther. We're all familiar with 95 Thesis. That's elementary. You know, what did he have problems with the Catholic Church? Major thing is the indulgences, that the Pope had declared the use of indulgences to collect money, to forgive sins, to expedite souls in purgatory, to elevate to heaven. This money was used as funding for a lot of the Renaissance work back in Rome. Luther saw this as corrupting the people who don't know they're even being corrupted, that it was making a mockery out of the Christian faith, and that people were being trained to think they could literally buy their way to heaven in a sense. So I would say that is the number one trigger of it. He bases that on the scripture of the Bible. So we'll talk, I have it there, scripture first, but the primacy of the scripture, meaning the idea that what's in the scripture should come first before any other document out there. So the Catholic hierarchy, who has interpreted the Bible for centuries, is losing out on that ability. So that kind of ties into the idea of Luther's idea of having a priesthood of all believers. I'm going to come back to that idea. What other things did he have problems with? Let's get general, the idea of works versus faith. Again, based on scripture, Luther believed good works should be done, but that it should be done so in a faithful manner. Fidelity, that you should believe, and because you believe, you will do the works. Whereas, in his opinion, he was being taught that simply by going through the motions, you could earn salvation that way. Also a problem, we just listed a few, nepotism, the church not picking the best qualified, but picking family members or wealthy donors in that case. Pluralism, church officials having too many offices that they can't correctly perform their duties, things like that. So be familiar with those and you should be good. So what's another idea? Vernacular Bibles. Using the printing press, you create Bible that are in the vernacular, common language. So Germany, in most cases, if we're talking about Martin Luther. And this is then, if we connect back to the priesthood of all believers, the Lutheran or Protestant idea that you don't need to go through the medium of the church. You can have a personal relationship with God through the scriptures, but you need to be able to read that. Catholic Church is like, no. We have the training and the expertise, thousands of years, well, thousands, you get the idea, 1,500 years, whatever, 1,000 years at least, to instruct correctly. Then Luther's like, but you're not instructing correctly because of the indulgences there. So this is shocking, and it leads to, I would say, a first idea of what's both religion and ties to society and politics. It's spelled wrong on the board, so don't get too close in there. It's French too, so I'm not going to pronounce it. Because this is the define. I tried. The question of the females, the debate about women. How do they fit in the context of this new rebirth of the Renaissance in general, and then specifically with the Protestant Reformation? The question is, for Protestants, to some degree, yes, they have a place. They should be educated like men. They should be taught to read. And there's a spectrum to some that say no. They should not have, any equal status to men. They're not capable of reason or rationality or the high fine arts. So where do Protestants then say women have a place? That is to instruct their own children. So therefore they should be taught to read the scripture and teach religion that way. You'll actually see later on, I don't have it on here, that the Catholic Church will make adjustments in their Reformation. I should have added the Ursulines. I'm going to add it right now because I have the markers. It's going to be small because I don't have a lot of room. Different orders of nuns in which women could be included. So there's that. Let's keep rolling. All right. That's pretty much all I've read. We're good. Protestant Reform continues. I always say each one of these units is like a tree. Each one of these subunits is a branch off the tree. Sometimes they're intertangled. Most of the time they're intertangled. And then the other items become like branches and leaves and maybe even insects on the leaves for the detail with that. All right, other reform movements. Let's hold off on the Church of England and Anglicanism. Let's go to No Fun John Calvin, Calvinism. For all intents and purposes, let's focus on two words. The theory of predestination, which is fun. The idea that, yes, faith is good, works are good, but are you kidding me? If God's almighty and omnipotent, then there's nothing a mortal can do to earn salvation. It is through grace alone we are saved. God has already chosen the select few. So he's going to create these theocracies, namely in Geneva, Switzerland is where that takes place. And a very much locked down, morally strict society. The idea being those who would sort of accept that way of life or enter into that voluntarily already have the predisposition of being in favor of God's chosen ones. They also then, because of this mentality, everything revolves around work. And so your merchant class, your business class, your artisan class are mostly going to come from Calvinist communities. The idea that if I'm working, I can't be sinning. We still carry that tagline, at least I've seen it in movies where old grandmas kind of say idle time is a devil's plaything. You will manipulate it if you get bored. So keep busy. And they keep busy. If we connect that back, you won't hear till the 19th century, Max Weber call it the Protestant work ethic. The idea that this Protestant idea that money, hard work equals success equals capital is a sign of God favoring you. And so money becomes not seen as this root of all evil, but as something you're to use to grow communities and humanity. So it's an offshoot of humanism, really. And so you can credit a little bit Calvinists with the development of capitalism, and as they're persecuted in Europe, specifically in England, they will move out to, well, in England, I'm going to jump way down to here to this year's, but that's the next unit. They become our pilgrims and establish maybe the American work ethic. I don't know. All right, what else we got? Oh, yeah, we're good. Theocracy simply means kratia, rule by religion. So other groups, the more radical Anabaptists, which they're kind of like the modern Amish community in a sense, again, a separation of religion from the secular state. I'm not reviewing the word secular with you anymore. So if you drive through, the God's country of Wisconsin and grab a pie from the Amish and see they're nice, you understand they don't like technology. That goes all the way back to these ideas of the original Anabaptists. The name tells it all, in a sense, without baptism, meaning only adults should be baptized after they've made the decision to do so, because a child is not a rational creature and cannot do that. We went in detail with what maybe I would consider the first war of religion, known as the Peasants' Revolts in the German states, led by Thomas Müntzer. We actually looked at that DBQ, and I'm probably going to continue to use it, so it's a great one to start off. You see that happening, and it's a violent affair. Is it political? Is it religious? Is it both? Because those are so intertwined. If that's a theme for this unit, that's the theme for the unit. There's no separating of politics and religion. Kind of why it was an important, idea with the founding of a lot of democracies in the Western world. Let's just jump ahead and get some vocab done. So a peasant revolt leads to, in 1555, big date there, the Peace of Augsburg, which we can call sort of the first act of religious pluralism. So within the Holy Roman Empire, you have the expression, whose kingdom, their religion. There's a couple different interpretations, but that's generally it off the top of my head. So if I'm the ruler of Saxony, whatever my religion is, people that live in Saxony will be that religion. Not so fast, only if it's Lutheran or Catholic. No Calvinists, and no, certainly not any Anabaptists, because both those groups are calling for an end of the state completely or running their own society. So as long as you're down with the Holy Roman Emperor and being taxed and that whole system of the political structure, you're cool in the HRE for now. So it's shortly after Charles V, dies right after that. See, I don't know everything either. I forget. Sometimes I have to go look things up, but I think so. All right, where are we at? Oh, Anglicanism. Do we want to go there? Because that takes us to a lot. Let's just get the gist of it. Anglicanism is the Church of England. You see it as Angles being the people who were indigenous to the island. So Angleland, England, Church of England, there it is. So it's in 1534 that Henry VIII, former defender of the Catholic faith, hardcore Catholic, hated Lutherans, decided to create his own religion. And it's very similar to Catholicism. The only difference is he cuts the Pope off. So that's why acts of supremacy. He is now supreme. So he merges the crown with the religion in England. We've talked, in detail in class. The primary reason was to secure an heir to the throne by virtue of getting a divorce from his Spanish Habsburg wife. Politically, not a great idea in the moment, but he's thinking long terms. So we'll come back to that as it's going to lead into some of the wars of religion over there. What else we got? Thomas More, which I forgot the H for some reason. It's bothering me. Thomas More is a confidant of Henry VIII. Henry VIII has him, I can't remember, beheaded or burnt at the stake. I want to say beheaded because it seems like it'd be less cruel, because they were homies. He was a Christian humanist going in the school of Erasmus, wanting to see the church reform, but thinking challenging the Pope, bad idea, naughty sin. Challenged Henry with the acts of supremacy, lost his life for it. His most famous work, Utopia, describes the perfect Christian humanist society. which I'm realizing now we forgot it's a reading class. So we should probably come back and do that at some point. We used to do a whole thing with it, but just time, man. All right, what else we got? Can you pause it so I get some water? Welcome back, if you even knew I was gone. All right, let's jump down to the French. As this gets complicated, and let's just throw the vocab out there. And we've talked about how to write about this, and let's get into some words, really, jumping down here. Huguenots, or Huguenots, as I keep hearing. It's French. I like to always pronounce things phonetically, as I've been hearing often. The exam is not an oral test, it's a written test, so it doesn't matter how you pronounce it. Those are the French, and you're going to see the battles there are with French Catholics. So Gallicanism, you'll also see this word. I did not see it as a required AP word, but it's just fun to know. And then Calvinists in England will be your Puritans. They'll also have problems with Catholics. They're also going to have problems with the Church of England as well. Mainly the Catholics when we talk about the English Civil War, which is in Unit 3, which if you follow the arrow real quick, 1642 to 1649. All right. And then when you hear the word Presbyterians, those are Scottish Calvinists. John Knox, who's in our Elizabeth DBQ, that we just took a look at as well. All right. Within the French society, you kind of got, you have 8 wars of religion that all deal with political alliances and religion. It's these 3 families, which I didn't put up here, but we've talked about. I thought they were up here. Anyway, they're not. And I'm not going to try to pronounce them all because they're French and someone's going to make the one that starts with a V, the one that starts with a B, and the one that starts with a G. From each of those, there's a fine balance between Catholicism and Protestantism. They're Huguenots. In this segment, we're not going to talk about it. It results in 2 crucial events, I would say. One is the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, ordered by Catherine de' Medici as she was the regent of her young son, Henry ruling. And that is where there was a wedding ceremony in Paris. Huguenot nobles were invited and then slaughtered the next morning. And that terror spread throughout France. So it really triggered more and more. And that's a date, I think it's a good one to know. There's Catherine de' Medici, 1572, August 24th, 1572 is when that takes place. You then have the power struggle of the War of the 3 Henrys. One Henry is poisoned. I think the other one died in battle, if I recall. So the only Henry left by French law becomes the monarch of this newly forming state. So we're still in that new monarch era as well, centralization of power. And let's follow the line from 3 Henrys to, oh, my purple got erased. I was wearing a hat all day too, so my hair looks stupid. That's why. I was in the school play. Kind of a big deal. Which becomes Henry IV. He was Henry of Navarre. He is the first Bourbon king. And in 1598, shortly into his reign, he issues the Edict of Nantes, which will grant some religious freedom for Huguenots in certain territories in France. So it's another example of religious pluralism, the idea of allowing people to worship to stop the violence for the good and security of the state. By doing so, Henry IV becomes a politique, much like Elizabeth I, unlike Mary I. And let's talk about her. Well, let's do this real quick because it's easy. The Catholic Reformation, sometimes called the Catholic Counter-Reformation. I think recent history said, no, they were making their own reforms before Luther came along anyway with his 95 Thesis in 1517. Just throw that date at you. So there was Pope Leo X is the individual you'd want to associate with the Reformation, calling the meeting of the Council of Trent in roughly the mid, you can see it lines up, the mid-16th century. And what is discussed, it's all the tactics you'll see throughout this course. 1, find people, in this case the Jesuits led by Loyola of Ignacia, to go about Europe and then in the New World as well and convert people back to Catholicism or into Catholicism. You gain more followers. You can look at it nefariously that they go to Mass then, they're going to donate money, etc., etc. That's going to strengthen everything you want to do. You ban certain books that have heresy in terms of their opinion, namely the works of everyone that we've just talked about up here. And if you find people with them, you torture them, much like the Spanish Inquisition, the Roman Inquisition, and you use that to find and get people to rat each other out. So spies, banning books, and there's people spreading. If you're not a Catholic, you can call it propaganda. If you are a Catholic, you'd say the truth. So there it is. And we talked about the Ursulines already. A lot of this Roman Inquisition and Index of Prohibited Books, you can see, correlates with the witchcraft trials of Europe, which we talked earlier this year about. But I drew this little mountain thing to just show that point that witch trials will exist throughout this era, but they become the most rapid, both in accusations and then convinced during the most severe times of religious strife and warfare. Probably, even though it's there, tilting more in the time period of the 30 Years' War is really where you're going to see that those numbers really jump in the German states. So, okay, Henry dies. Let's just make the story short, because I feel like, again, I feel like we hit this one pretty heavy in class. And you have a reversion. That's a word. I don't know. Mary's Catholic. Her mom was Catholic. Her mom was Spanish, Holy Roman Empire, Habsburgs, Spain. Putting that all together, she probably has some issues with her dad divorcing her mom and ruining the family name, etc., etc. So she's hardcore Catholic, and she's going to make sure England goes back to its Catholic ways. She will marry, in the weird Habsburg family tree, Philip II, who was Charles V's son. So if you do the math and want to connect all the family trees, yeah, they're cousins somehow. So you got that rolling. So, we talked about why was it okay for Mary to be a queen. Well, Mary was married, where Elizabeth wasn't. It's a different story for a different day. Why is Mary? Oh, okay, that's not attached to the 30 Years' War. Let's make sure that's clear. Purple, where are you at? What time we got for the bell? We'll wrap it up. All right, so there it is. Mary dies. It's a very short reading, and then there's again, we kind of studied the DBQ on this. Elizabeth I, who is Protestant, like her father and her mother, Anne Boleyn. So she is going to remain unmarried as the Virgin Queen. This will anger Philip, who thought the crown should sort of be his because he was married to Mary. So he's going to invade Spain in 1588 with the Spanish Armada, which is extremely costly, and they don't even really ever get to England. It's going to bankrupt Spain, not to mention the hyperinflation, price revolution, all those things. They're going to kind of put Spain out of the dominance game in Europe, and you're going to see France and England and the Dutch emerge after the defeat of the Spanish Armada there, and the Protestant wins, if you will. Elizabeth, also known as a politique, again, allows religious pluralism to proliferate. The DBQ we look at is so good for just seeing the examples of that, so no need to dwell on it. The only other major, obviously it's a really major event, is in 1618, the beginning of the 30 Years' War, the defenestration of Prague, throwing people out windows into manure. And again, it's like every other thing we've looked at, it's both religious and political, and we looked at that DBQ as well. So, not going to go into a lot of detail on that here. It's the most significant of everything on here. I would say it's so detrimental to Europe in terms of warfare, the nastiness and the brutalness, and then the witchcraft, and then there's climate shifts. It's just horrible. The result, though, in 1648, which is a must know date, is the Peace of Westphalia. For all intents and purposes, this class will stop sounding like Sunday school because we don't have to talk about religion that much anymore, because religious pluralism completely will be granted throughout the Holy Roman Empire. I don't know, people weren't happy with it. Pope certainly wasn't happy, but it was kind of like, there's no one left to kill, so we got to stop this and move on. And as I talked about what fills that void, absolutism, constitutionalism, the monarchs seizing more centralized authority, to quote Cartman. All right, lastly, I got way over here. Charles V is a main player. We've talked about him so much throughout this entire period up to here in trying to keep the Holy Roman Empire Catholic and united. He fails, sorry dude. They then basically, in terms of them being the Habsburgs, give up on Western Europe. Spain's plummeting, and then start focusing east. Well, that's where their conflict's going to be with the Ottoman Empire. We don't have the year up there, but 1683 will be a big event in the Battle of Vienna. And we'll start talking less about the Habsburgs and referring to them more as a state, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, even though they're still Habsburgs. Okay, what else is rolling throughout this time period? Real quick, in 3 minutes. The art, let's just jump there, that dominates is Baroque and Mannerism. They're virtually the same thing. Mannerism just sort of predates Baroque. 2 examples of names, Peter Paul Rubens, El Greco, just to get them. We've looked at the examples. Some of it's really cool art. It's elongated, twisted, emotional images, highly religious usually. Sometimes the monarchs will use to show off how cool they are. But it's like Renaissance art that's trying to get you to feel something. A lot of it, especially the ones we looked at, we talked about the St. Bart's Day Massacre there. That's all cool stuff there. What's going on just socially? Well, as the Catholic Church loses control and regulates morality, a new version of regulated morality, so secular morality, if that makes sense, will develop. You'll have Charivari, is public humiliation. This is how we'll keep you in line if you don't necessarily follow the religion that we do. Because of the new middle class starting to emerge, you have like these time periods. I mean, I have a whole other podcast on this, so why am I telling you about this now? Saint Day festivals were the time where the average human beings, and they are several times a year, were able to, and these were put on by the church, to socialize and have fun and get rowdy a little bit, etc. Blood sports emerge in this, boxing mostly, wrestling, things like that. Carnival, both of these things kind of have the same effect as it's a release from the busyness of the work week. Carnival is definitely more of the sinner party time, and some of these stricter religious movements are all like, no, no, no. Others are like, yeah, but they need it. It's like homecoming week. You can act like a moron for 5 days, but as soon as the next Monday rolls around, it's like, boom, we're right back to business, etc., etc. But it gives you that little like, woo, you put mask on. Just watch the other podcast. All right. Anything? Well, if you have questions, well, we already did this in class A, so I'm erasing this board today, because we got to get ready for Unit 3 to show up here. And that deals primarily with where we take off, the English Civil War, and how that will end in constitutional England, the reign of Henry VIII and the other Bourbons, namely Louis XIV, and absolutism. We'll look at the Dutch a little bit and what happened there as they got freedom from Habsburg-controlled Spain. And then the question of like, what's going on in Eastern Europe? There's this new team of the Russians coming to town. We haven't even talked about that yet. The Romanov, and then the emergence of Prussia, and like we said, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire too. And Poland, the blinking light of European history. All right, deuces.